All right, recording is started. This is the Network Plumbing Working Group meeting for Thursday, August 2nd, 2018. The major purpose of today's meeting is to go over some quick spec updates since the last meeting. There's a couple of short questions that I think we can probably get through pretty quickly. And then the main goal again is to basically approve of the spec if we all think that it is sufficient to go out as a V1. Again, this is not necessarily the end. We would like to explore further improvements for V2 spec, and Doug has been kind enough to start a document that has a lot of the things that we've discussed in the past and decided to punt into a V2 spec or decided to explore further. Hopefully everybody read over the current spec. I did try to answer most of the comments in the Google Doc from this week. So I guess let's kick it off. From last week, we had a couple of changes, or not last week, 2 weeks ago. In the meeting 2 weeks ago, we had a couple of changes. The first one was a fairly major change from the namespace of the annotations and objects. We decided that shorter was better, and so we used the K8S abbreviation instead of Kubernetes, and decided to update the spec to reflect that. So that change has been made. And also I added a example of config list in the JSON CNI config, which was requested. I think those were the only two major requests to come out of last week's meeting. So beyond that, see, the next item in the agenda was there were some requests for additional CRD short object names. The Kubernetes CRDs allow you to define some short aliases or short names that you can use when referring to the objects. The only one we had was, let's see, net attached def, just kind of a short version of network attachment definition. And so I think Caral and Peter had asked if we could potentially make even shorter ones. I had added net to that list, but I think, Mike, you had some comments on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm working on a system with actual network objects. So I'd like those to be called net for short.
Okay. Is there something else we could do, like net def or something like that instead of net?
Well, net def is, the problem is we have three critical concepts in there. Right? If you leave out the attachment, it sounds like you're talking about the definition of a network, which we're explicitly not. So I'd say for now, net attached def is about as good as we're going to get as far as my imagination goes, but I'm open to other suggestions if people can come up with one. I don't like NAD. That's got a slang meaning I don't think we want. I haven't been able to think of other shorter ones.
Any other thoughts? Would it be acceptable for now to just go with net attached def? I mean, also in your own implementation of this, if any of you are writing plugins, you can obviously add anything that you want to that list. The specification does not currently limit exactly what you can do with it. You could add more if you wanted to.
Yeah, I like that perspective on it, Dan, and I totally hear where Mike is coming from. If you have something else in your setup that uses that nomenclature, that's not great. And at least in my own experience with usage of this, it's in lab environments, but I'm, listing those network attachment definitions a lot. The bottom line is what I wind up doing, even if I were to give it a shorter name, is I just start hitting tab wildly after the first few characters.
Yep. So, yeah, tab complete does save you quite a lot of typing here.
So I think for this iteration, it's fine to just have the net attached def as a short one.
Peter, if I think you're on the call, is that okay to just leave it with net attached def at the moment and possibly revisit this for V2?
Yeah, okay. I agree with it.
Okay. All right. I will record that decision in the agenda doc. All right, and then Peter, you'd also brought up the next item, which would be to make the CRD parts of the spec optional. If you want to kind of talk about that or explain what you were thinking there for a little bit while I'm typing the previous decision down, that would be great. Either that or I can try to summarize.
Yeah, that's my question.
Okay.
And okay.
Yeah, you can go ahead.
Okay. I guess we may want to make CRD paths optional because I think in some stick plugins they may want to manage their network information, and their custom management will give them more flexibility, and the CRD may not meet the requirements of management.
Can you explain the concern a little bit more?
Yeah. Take our CM plugin Liter, for example. We manage not only the network but also tenants. So we want to use a consistent method to manage all of our custom objects. So we don't use CRD for now.
Does that make some sense, Mike?
I
think basically the question was, can we make, he would like to make the CRD object optional, but they still want to use the status and the selection annotations, but not necessarily follow exactly the same object. So in the selection annotation, that would be the same, but presumably that would select some other resource that may only be known to that plugin, as opposed to having a standardized CRD object.
Okay, so the idea is not that it's moving the content of the CRD into the pod, but it's rather saying he wants to use some other kind of object instead of the CRD we're doing.
Yeah, and that is, I understand it, that selection, that same, whatever mechanism the plugin would use would still be selected by the same selection annotation as we have here. It's just the data for that object or that network attachment definition would be stored somewhere else. It would be plugin defined. So the question is, if we make the object definition itself optional in the spec, but not the attachment, the annotations for selection and status.
Yeah, let me just back you up a sec, make sure I understand. So you said understood by the plugin. So we're talking about understood in particular by the implementation or the meta plugin.
Correct.
Yeah. I mean, in some sense, as I'm not even sure we need to do anything. I mean, if he wants to make a meta plugin that, implements part of the spec and not part of the spec, that's, nobody's going to stop him. If we want to say that, these annotations can be used with other descriptions of how to make attachments, I guess that makes sense. Yeah.
Does anybody else have any thoughts or comments on that particular issue?
I think that it's probably fine to say that it's optional to do that, but I guess kind of from a bigger picture, Peter, I'm interested to hear how you solve that and how in version 2 maybe we could expand upon this idea and maybe find a different way to specify it, or some kind of decision tree on how, you know, an implementation might choose which method to use. So I just want to throw that out there.
Yeah, I agree on that. We discussed this in V2 specification, and we can have more discussion and get the real use case about that.
Okay. I mean, that basically sounds like if everybody else agrees and Peter agrees that maybe we could punt this particular decision to V2 and leave the spec as is. And obviously, you know, if your plugin does not want to implement or chooses not to implement this part, that's fine too. Does that everybody sound okay with that particular decision to discuss this again for V2 and not change any of the spec language around this?
Yeah, I think we should not change V1 for this, because we do spell out pretty clearly in the spec itself that says this spec defines a CRD, right? So it does not sound like an optional component, and I think if we want to make it optional, that should be a later thing.
Okay. Is that okay, Peter? If we specifically add this to Doug's V2 document and revisit in the next couple of meetings?
Okay.
All right. Thanks.
Okay, thanks.
All right, I will again update the agenda with that decision.
And I went ahead and added it to the new items for consideration for V2. It's number 7 on the open questions. So thanks, Peter, for bringing that up. Appreciate it, man.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Doug. Do you want to talk really quick about the V2 considerations document, Doug?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to throw it in chat. It's also in the agenda. The gist here is I went and took our kind of open and closed questions from the bottom of the doc, copy paste, and then I went through and I said, hey, what's the stuff that's you know, kind of closed for sure? And I sorted that chaff out of it. I then had like a few things that were kind of on my notepad that I had chatted with people about, so I just put kind of bullet points for those. And anyone who's interested in some of those items, you'll see they probably just don't have a lot of sub-bullet points on them. Feel free to flesh them out. But what I kind of thought that we could do is introduce this document. It's public. You guys can go and edit it to your heart's content. Put whatever you want in there, and then you know, at some later date, we can decide to kind of give a rundown of these and decide, hey, which of these are we the most interested in for version 2? You know, it's like, at least from my perspective, I think in some of the most recent iterations we did of V1, we did a great job of kind of you know, opening the door to creative implementations. And I think some of those more creative implementations may be of interest to a lot of people that were involved with here. So I'd love to kind of expand upon those. So that's kind of what I've got going on. But yeah, go ahead and have at it, guys, for sure.
So I've skimmed it, and I don't see the 2 most disruptive things that I've heard.
Okay.
That being the interaction with resource allocations and resource definitions, and the network service mesh work.
Definitely need to get those on there. Yeah, certainly, you know, I have chatted with people about kind of resource management and device plugin considerations. I did not flesh that out in this doc. I'd love anyone else to jump in and flesh that out. But as far as service mesh, I'm definitely interested in figuring out where there's an overlap here, where these things work well together. But I certainly would defer to somebody who, may be more involved in that project than I currently am at the moment, for sure.
So this is cool. So our team started working on the resource management interaction between the device plugins and some on the NUMA manager stuff. We started doing some kind of POC work with a MetaPlugin reference implementation. So we will flush out those information in upcoming weeks.
All right, thanks, Carell. Also, Mike, is that something you'd be willing to add to the document? Maybe just that bullet point and then a little bit more about what you're thinking there.
I just put the bullet points in.
Okay.
I frankly don't have a lot of thoughts, but I put the bullets in.
Okay, excellent. And hopefully the next couple of weeks or month or so, we can start adding some of those thoughts, or adding some of the experiences that we have for POCs for that and any of these items.
Do you think we have to put the onus for the bullet points?
It might be helpful to just tag those with somebody who's knows a lot about it or is sort of, a contact point for that. I think all these are kind of up for discussion. But if one of these items, network service mesh is probably not a great example. But for some of the other ones, if there's a specific person that was interested in it and is kind of a domain expert there, it would probably be useful to tag with that person's nickname or initials.
Okay, cool.
All right. Thanks, Doug, for starting that document. Definitely let's all refer to that, update that, add in more detail, and that would or should be the basis document for what we want to do next here in this group over the next couple of months. All right, next agenda item is, let's see, Dan Winship. I do not see Dan on this call, but I guess I will proxy for him. And this was kind of an open question that we had from a while back that we decided to punt. And his question was, are we okay with version 1 being every user can use every network attachment definition? And assuming this is referring to some of the access control that we had talked about a number of months ago. Does anybody have any thoughts about that? I'm not as intimately connected with some of that stuff as probably some of you are. The only thought I had there was to add some quick language to the spec recommending that implementations of this spec add some kind of RBAC or admission controllers to, if they wish to restrict which networks pods can use, to add those concepts and implementations to allow that.
So I think it's fair to say, I kind of agree with the sentiment. Let's get something done, call it done, and then we can address version 2. And in fact, maybe it's we go to version 1 bis and so on. But I'd like to draw a line under what we've got. I think that the fact that we've got objects means we've got kind of a good foundation for applying RBAC. But there's not quite a trivial way to do that. So I'm inclined to say, let's, for now, just agree on this much. And, the access control, which I completely agree there should be. Mm-hmm. That's one of the things, TBD.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good point. We have discussed it in the past, and I think we sort of punted it to work on some of the more nuts and bolts of this. And as far as I can recall, and having read over the spec last night too, I don't see anything that specifically prohibits, having some kind of RBAC or admission control, language in the spec that does that. So I guess I would expect that if the implementations want to do that, that they, they're not specifically prohibited by the spec. There's no language in it that says, every network attachment definition must be available to everybody, with the exception of the default cluster network. So I think, if we kind of leave that open, then that should be sufficient for the moment, and implementations that want to do this can do it. Does that match with everybody else's understanding of the specification?
It wasn't obvious to me. I mean, I think you could reasonably argue that it's implied that they are all accessible. So if you want to actually put in some explicit words saying they might not necessarily be all accessible, the implementation may restrict access, I'd be fine with saying just that much.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a good idea. Let me take, let's see here. How about I will really quick develop some language for the specification, and we can turn it over to Peter for his quick demo of the knitter project. And then after he is done with that demo, we can circle back around and take a look at the language that I've added to the spec. And then if everybody's happy with that language, I'd like a kind of general agreement or voice vote or whatever that we're fine with the specification and that we agree, and then we will send V2, or excuse me, V1 off into the sunset as a complete spec. Does that sound
So
like
Dan,
okay? Yep, go ahead.
I'm afraid, Dan, I'm sorry. I was spent much of the day with much less access than you have now. And I sent an email late in the afternoon, my time, with the fewer issues that we have not discussed.
Okay, I have not. Yeah, I haven't seen that email, Mike. What were some of those? Is there any way to add those to the agenda doc? Should we do that really quick?
Oh, yeah. Let me list them. In 3 of the sections, you talk about a key being invalid. I think you meant to say it's the value that we're concerned about. What happens if the value is invalid? That's, I think, 4.1.2.1.3, 4, and 5.
Okay, so hang on a sec. 4.1.2, let's see.
4.1.2.1.3 is the first one.
Got it, and that's IPs? Yep. Okay, I see your comments in the doc there. Yep.
Yeah.
Yes. You know what, Mike? I think you were right. I believe I meant to say value.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's that one.
And then there's 2 more in the analogous sections.
Got it. Did you comment on those in the doc, or?
No, just the first one.
Got it. Okay.
And then the next one is in section 4.1.2.1.4.1.
Yeah, don't you love our numbers?
Yes. All right. Structure is great.
I fixed up 4.1.2.1.4.
Okay. And then in 0.5, there's another one.
Yep. Let's see here. If the value. Okay. Got that one as well. Were there others?
No, I just saw those 3.
Okay. Were there any other?
Yes.
All right.
In section 4.1.2.1.4.1, there's an example Mac. That's a bad example.
I see that. You are correct. What should we update that one to? What would you like? You get to pick.
Fine. Just change that 1 to a 2 and we're good.
It is done.
Okay.
I got the one below it as well.
Okay, thanks.
All right.
I know. So often I just use 0, 1, 0, 2, 0, 3, 0, 4 just for the heck of it. So.
Right.
All right.
Yeah, if you make it 2, 4, 6, 8, we're great. 1, 2, 3 doesn't work so well. Okay. Next one. Section. This is a more debatable wording thing. In section 4.2.1, Rule 3 talks about a CNI IF name being generated. But the preceding section says, well, maybe actually the user is specifying the IF name. So I was just thinking we might want the language in Rule 3 to be a little more clear that it's not contravening what's said preceding.
All right, good point. So would you be okay with wording added for point 3? Okay, so just for the record, point 3 currently says CNI underscore IF name : generated by the CNI delegating plugin for a given attachment. ... Would you be okay with, let's see here, CNI underscore if name : if not specified in the network attachment selection annotation generated by the CNI delegating plugin?
Sure.
Okay. All right. And
Two more.
obviously, if anybody has any other comments or thoughts on these changes, please speak up. Otherwise, we'll just kind of power through them.
Right. Two more. They're getting more substantial. In section 5.3.5, it says the default field is required. But then in section 5.4, there's an example that doesn't have the default field in all three maps. So I'm not sure what's actually intended.
Nope, that is
So hold on. I think that so in this example here, 5.4 example is now I see what you're saying. Like,
Yep. Yeah, so you're right, Mike. It does contradict between the first sentence of 5.3.5 and the second one. Let's see.
No, the second sentence is fine.
Yeah,
It says,
it's true.
The
right. The
example
problem is the
is
example
that.
contravenes that.
Yeah.
Fair enough. So, okay, here's the solution for that one. In the example, let's remove that. Oh, are you working on that, Doug?
Yeah, he's fixing it right now.
Yeah. So what
Fair
I
enough.
did is, you know what? I just had been reading that sentence wrong, and I'm like, it's required for the one that's default. And then I read it again. I'm like, no, it's required. So I'm like, okay, I'll add the default falses here. Good
Yep.
eye, Mike. That's awesome.
All right.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thanks, Doug.
while you're doing it, like there's also this like funny looking MAC address that's right above it.
Oh, the 00. Yeah, you probably don't want 00. You want, again, yeah, there you go.
Awesome. Thanks, Doug.
No problem.
All right. That one is fixed.
All right, last item. And the business about readiness. It says there's an option to time out after 2 minutes. But I thought we'd have self-hosting scenarios where the default network takes more than 2 minutes to become ready.
Do you mean if actually can you explain that a little bit more?
Oh,
Mike?
sure, yes. So let's just look at section 6.1.2.
Yeah,
So-
and it says, the last sentence of that section is the recommended timeout value is 2 minutes.
But no, look at the whole section. It's an alternate readiness method, right? So the alternate readiness method says that it can be up to the plugin to hold until the default is ready, okay? And the implementation, our implementation of our meta plugin or whatever, has the option to not hold for more than 2 minutes. And I think that's in conflict with some of our self-hosting scenarios, where the kubelets are there more than 2 minutes before the default network is there.
Yeah, is it presumptuous to try to guess what that recommended timeout should be?
I'm concerned about a timeout, right? Because my understanding is the kubelets basically spin until today, right? The kubelets spin until the network's ready, no matter how long that is. So my suggestion is just forget about the timeout. Just stop. They wait. It waits until this option here is to wait until it's ready. Period. No timeout.
What do you think about that, Doug? Since you were originally brought up this issue.
Yeah, and I did. Well, okay. So I'm starting to pick up on what Mike's throwing down, because I did actually write, an implementation of this alternate readiness method. And the more I kind of talked it over with Tomo and Corral, the more we kind of leaned towards, instead of like, in our particular case, what I did was I'm like, I'll go into a wait loop and I'll just wait X amount of time in an interval until 2 minutes is reached, and then, be good to go. But after I talk to those guys, they're like, man, isn't a exponential back off going to be a nicer solution? And the more that I think about it, the more I like it, and I have my own pull request on that feature blocked over this. And there's part of me that thinks just having the exponential timeout is just fine, and it can just wait longer and longer each time for that. In my particular case, I feel like that looks better, feels better. So I'm okay, actually, and maybe even I would prefer in my own case to just say, hey, why not just let this go on until it happens? Because the bummer is, right, if you time out, then somebody's going to have to go restart those pods or something. Some action
Right.
going to have to be
Right.
taken. So, you know what? Mike, you're just coming up with the good ones here today. I'm liking it.
Sorry.
Can we just remove the recommendation for timeout value and say that
No timeout. What he's saying is no timeout. It waits until the default network is ready, period.
Yeah, maybe we can put exponential backoff time.
No. The backoff is just
like
the exponential backup is just part of the implementation of the waiting. Right? It's just how you wait, right?
Okay, you want to say it. Okay, got it. Yeah. You want to say it's a waiting. Okay.
Yeah, just say that it waits. Period. No timeout.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah.
All right. Any other thoughts on that? Objections, comments, etc.?
I say let's roll with it. Yeah.
Okay.
I say yeah.
So here's what I'm going to do. I will update the specification in section 612 and simply remove the language around, first what I'll do is I'll read what it currently is, and then I'll read what I will change it to, and comments on that appreciated. It currently reads, the implementation must then block any pod network attachment detachment operations until the cluster-wide default network is ready or until a suitable timeout is reached. The recommended timeout value is 2 minutes. I'm proposing that we change that to the implementation must then block any pod network attachment detachment operations until the cluster-wide default network is ready, period. So in other words, remove the or until a suitable timeout is reached. The recommended timeout value is 2 minutes. We just chop that part off. Does that sound acceptable?
+1 from me.
Sounds exactly right.
All right. Any other comments?
+1
to me. Sounds good.
Done. All right. Did you have any others comments on that, Mike? Was that the end of your list?
That's the end of my list.
Okay. So circling back to the permissions issue, I added a section 7.4 in the runtime and implementation considerations section titled Restrictions on Selection of Network Attachment Definitions by Pods. And that section currently reads, implementations are free to impose restrictions on which network attachment definitions can be selected by a given pod. This can be done by RBAC, admission control, or any other implementation-specific method. Does that address the questions we have around permissions in RBAC, or should we change that language in some way?
Well, I like it, but as far as it goes, I wonder if we need to say if there's a violation, what happens in case of a violation?
You mean in terms of if the implementation is determined that the selection is not allowed for that pod?
Yes, that's what I mean.
Okay. Yep, that is a great point. We could add language like, let's see here. I'm assuming, Mike, that what we should say is that if a given selection or network attachment definition, if a given pod selects a network attachment that is not allowed to use, then we should fail the entire network operation for the pod. Is that correct? Or is that what you're expecting?
That is consistent with our other treatment of failures, so
Right.
that's probably the thing to say, yes.
Okay. Okay, so how about if we add to that section, if the implementation determines that a given network attachment definition selected by the pod is not allowed for that pod, it must fail the pod network operation. Does that sound sufficient?
Sounds good enough for me.
Do we need to explicitly say what is the default behavior, or is that just implied that every pod can access every network?
No, I think this is explicitly saying the implementation gets to decide that in some, and the specification is not specifying that. I mean, that's the way I read the language that's there right now. It says implementations are free to impose restrictions, which clearly implies implementations do not have to impose restrictions, and also implies that which restrictions are imposed is not being specified.
Does that make sense, Feng? Or
Okay,
do you have do you have a suggestion for how we could clarify that language? Or should we just go with what we got?
I think that's okay. I think we just need to be clear that that this is something that implementation will have to tell you, basically. Right? But yeah, I think that's probably fine. The first sentence, yeah.
Okay. All right. Are there, given that that's closed out, are there any other comments or considerations that we should should use to make changes to the specification? For me, the next step would be, if nobody has any further comments, I feel like the ones that we have addressed in this spec today are fairly minor and don't change the core substance of the spec. We could just basically have a voice vote on whether we all think that the current state of the specification document is acceptable and sufficient. And then if it is, go on to Peter's demo. Does that sound okay to everybody?
Yes.
Sounds good.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
All right.
Yep. Okay.
One
That's fine.
last chance to comment then. Again, any comments are welcome. Please speak up if you have any thoughts or comments. All right. If not, let us do basically a formal vote. Let's get an aye or a nay or a +1 or a yes or a no. And again, if anybody has any serious objections, please say so. Otherwise, on the count of 3. 1, 2, 3.
Aye.
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 That's one.
Aye.
Hi.
All right. It is thus approved. So thanks, everybody. Thank you for working on this and sticking it out for the better part of 6 or 7 months. Again, we will certainly talk about a V2 specification and talk about all those things that we have essentially punted from this specification, but I think we, as Mike talked about earlier, do need to get a good solid base. It's obviously not going to be perfect for everybody, but hopefully we can continue to address some of those concerns and fine-tune things over the next couple of months. So with that, we have a V1 spec, and over to Peter for his demo and introduction to Knitr. Thanks, everybody. You're up, Peter. Thanks, everybody. You're up, Peter.
Okay, thanks, Dan. Hi, everyone. I want to briefly show how Knitr works and its main features. After the introduction, if there still be time left, I will show you a short demo. Now let me try to share my screen. Wait a minute, please. Okay. Can you see my screen, guys?
Looks good, Peter. Thanks.
Looks good, Peter. Thanks. Okay, all right. This is my presentation. Okay, all right. This is my agenda. First, I will give you an introduction to Netter. It's an overview of the architecture. Then I will list some of its main features. And then it's the to-do list. We will add more features to Netter. And then last is a demo. By the way, Netter has already been open sourced on GitHub. If some guys are interested in it, you can access the GitHub. Okay. Different from CI delegating plugin such as Matas, Netter is a thick plugin. It has four components. Netter Manager, Netter Monitor, Netter Agent, and Netter Plugin. And it processes all of the network attachment workflow. This diagram shows how Netter components interact with each other and the Kubernetes components. The first component is Netter Manager. It manages tenants and networks. By the way, it doesn't use CRD to store network information currently. Netter Manager also allocates IP address to pods. And the second one is Netter Monitor. Netter Monitor watches the creation and the deletion of pods. When a pod is created, the monitor will get the event from Kube API server. It then gets the pod annotation and passes what networks the pod wants to attach to. It then asks the Netter Manager to allocate IP address to the pod. The two components are deployed on master, and the other two components are Netter Agent and Netter Plugin. They are on the node. When the pod is landing on a node, Netter Plugin will be invoked by Kubernetes. The plugin just forwards the request to Netter Agent, and the agent will ask Netter Monitor for IP address and other necessary information for the pod. Then the monitor, okay. Then there's when the agent get IP and other information from the monitor, it will do the real attachment work. For example, creating interfaces, writing flow tables, and attaching the interfaces to pod network namespace. This is the configuration of net attachment selection in pod annotation. It's kind of different from the current specification, but we will change it in the future. Users can specify what networks the pod want to attach to, and some pod-specific attributes for the network attachment. Some of the fields are nickname, or interface name, and nick type. And we also have field called IP group name. I will introduce this field later in my presentation. The following are some main features of Native. The first one is that it supports for the native network model of Kubernetes. All of the pods can attach to a cluster-wide network if users don't specify network attachment selection annotation. And the pods can attach to multiple networks and get the related multiple interfaces. Yeah, this is just what we want. Niter also supports for multiple tenants. The tenant maps to the namespace in Kubernetes. Tenants can share a public network. For example, the default cluster-wide network. They can also have their own private networks. A tenant private network is isolated from other tenants' private networks. Niter can keep an IP address for a pod even after it recreates in place. That means if the UUID of the pod doesn't change, its IP will not change. One example is that if a pod infra container or pod container is killed by accident, the pod will be recreated in place. In this case, the pod IP will not change. Niter had a concept of IP group. We have a use case that users want to reserve some specified IP address for the application. They can specify these IP addresses into an IP group. A pod can reference the IP group in its network attachment selection annotation. And then Niter will allocate an IP address from the pod only from that IP address. For example, we have an IP group. It has 5 IP addresses, and we have 2 pods. They reference the IP group, and that means that they want to get an IP address from that IP group. Then after the pod are created, Niter will allocate one IP for the pod from the IP group. If users want to specify a special IP address for a single pod, they can also use the IP group feature. They can create an IP group which only contains that special IP address. Then Niter will allocate that IP address to the pod. So those are the main features of Niter. Here it is a to-do list. We will implement the V1 specification. For example, changing the format and the key names of network attachment selection annotation, adding network attachment status annotations. As is discussed today, since we are not we haven't decided if a CRD part the optional or required part. We will think about this part later. And as I introduced at the beginning, Niter store network objects and information in its custom object, and use an API server itself. We will also want to support SR, IOV, and DBDK, and IPv6, and also the network policy in the future. Yeah, the above are the introduction to NETR, and these are the items I want to show in demo. Because I'm not sure if my environment is stable, so I recorded the demo and uploaded it to GitHub. Let's take a look at it. The first one is default cluster-wide network and service. Let me make it.
Okay, we got about 4 or 5 minutes left, so you know, maybe we can go a minute or two over, but to respect everybody's time, can we do a couple of the demos and maybe give links to the rest? If
Okay. Okay.
Okay, thanks.
Then I will, I will
Okay,
show some, I will show two main demos. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks, Dan. The first one is attached to multiple networks. Yeah, we can see that the default tenant has two networks. One is the public network, and the other one is its private network. And yeah, wait a second. Let's create the RC. Yeah. Yeah, they'll get IP address allocated. Yeah, one is answer 0 and line 0. Yeah, here another part. It also gets the interfaces allocated. Okay, that's it. Let me select the other one. Okay. Here, this one is that we can create a new network and attach port to it. I use NetCTL. It's a CLI, a client of NETR. NETR create network media. I create a new network media, and we can see that the tenant already has the network. Then I configure the annotation to add the media network, and let me create. Okay, yeah. Yeah, the port get the media 0 interface. Yeah, another part. Yeah, we can ping from the new network. Okay. Okay, I think I can only show the 2 short demos here.
Okay, thanks a lot, Peter.
Thanks.
Were there
thanks.
any questions on the demos or questions on Knitr? I believe Peter put the link to the repo and thus also all of the demo videos in the agenda doc. So if anyone wants to take a look at those, you can obviously follow up. Any other questions for Peter? Comments?
Just a thank you. Thank you, Peter. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Doc.
All right. If not, let's close the meeting out. Thank you, everybody. And I have tagged V1 of the specification in the Google Doc changes. I have also saved a PDF and an editable copy locally, and I will send those out to the mailing list and investigate where we can post those online so that we have a more permanent and accessible record of the V1 spec as we have approved it. So with that, thanks everybody, and we will have our next meeting on August 16th. So have a good week and weekend.
Thank you. Bye.
All right.
Yep.
Thank you, Dan.
Bye.
Thank you.